The guy was looking up in front of him with a shocked face. He had dark hair, blue eyes, a blue hoodie, and a jacket draped over it. He spoke hesitantly to the thing above him that he was looking at with such fascination. It was a creature with horns on its head, a long neck, and an elongated snout, its eyes glittering with a bright light. It looked like a dragon. The monster had thick fur growing on top of it. The guy would look at him and ask, "Could you? What is it anyway?" The monster rose to its full height in front of him and stretched out, the cold, snowy air enveloping it. The man with short blonde hair grinned. His face was full of wrinkles, and he was wearing a black sweater and a red cape. He also looked at the monster and said that it was the Lord of the Snow Plains, a sorcerer named Bailey's, who was standing in front of them. Half a day ago. It was bright outside, with huge multi-story buildings everywhere. The boy with dark hair and blue eyes was named Zukayan. He looked down, took out his phone from his jacket pocket and looked at the phone screen. It was a message from the boss. The message said, "Zukayan, when you arrive, go and help me print out some copies of this photo." Below was sent a photo with a bouquet of tulips painted on it and a huge thank you inscription on top. Zukayan carefully looked at the message, then his face twisted into a grimace of displeasure. He started shouting into the phone in frustration and calling the boss various names, saying that it was not just a picture, but an ordinary GIF image. Zukayan clenched his hand into a fist and continued to shout in frustration, saying that if he told him to also overcome the difficulties, it would be better to leave the printer alone. The image of a poor printer immediately popped into my head. Suddenly, Zukayan was interrupted by a huge shark that landed directly on the poor guy's head, and in surprise, he dropped the phone, which fell to the ground. Blood spurted from the poor guy's head, and he went on to grumble about how it hurt a lot and who else had thrown that thing on top of him. All of a sudden, he stopped talking and looked straight ahead as passersby started to turn around to see what had happened to the guy. Just a couple of seconds later, Zukayan collapsed on the ground, losing consciousness. Someone's voice told them to dial 120. Another voice of a stranger said that this guy was still very young and it was a pity that this happened to him. Hands Zukayan trembled. He was covered in blood. Blood from his head stained all of his clothes and body. Another, third voice of a stranger passing by said that perhaps throwing objects from a great height should already be considered a criminal case. Unexpectedly, Zukayan. He saw a huge rift that was oozing purple light. The rift was like a wound. It was a space-time rift. Zukayan's body floated through outer space as he was in zero gravity, his phone hanging in the air next to him. A notification appeared on the phone that the phone's charge was still at 5%. A voice said that the proofreader was detected. Zukayan turned to the voice with his eyes closed and asked who it was. The blood was still on his face. A serious gaze was directed towards the guy and the person's face wasn't completely visible. The voice said that it was all over and my mind was getting blurry again. An incredible cosmic image appeared in the guy's head. There were stars, a starry sky and space. Suddenly, a creature formed in front of him. Its entire body was made up of cosmic matter. It glowed with stars and sparkled with a bright purple color. The creature looked like a fox. Its eyes shone with a bright lilac light. Its ears were long, and it carefully bowed its head, looking at the person in front of it. Suddenly, the image dissipated and then reappeared, and the creature was standing in front of a spatial hole. Zukayan began to envelop the purple space around him, and it was as if he was on the edge of water. The creature swam over to his phone and dictated the setup. The guy's phone lit up with a bright light, but nothing was visible on the screen except for a bright, glowing yellow light. The creature swam back to Zukayan and looked at him carefully. The guy was still unconscious with his eyelids closed. After that, the creature shifted its gaze to the space-time rift, which looked like it was getting bigger and bigger. The creature widened its gaze and looked blankly at the rift in front of it. Suddenly, the rift grew larger and air and everything around it began to suck in. The creature immediately panicked. Star of the spirit. And it enveloped the air, and after the air dispersed before the eyes, a huge mountain appeared, which was covered with snow. A huge purple rift appeared in the sky. Zukayan suddenly flew out of the rift and fell straight to the ground. Zukayan was enveloped in a purple glow. There was a huge building nearby, consisting of several levels, 4 low buildings and 1 huge chimney that stretched high up. It was the Snow Plains Disaster Relief Headquarters. A man in a green uniform with short red hair was looking straight ahead, and there were many screens in front of him. He was looking at the image on the screens and a multi-legged monster appeared on one of the screens. In a panic, the man began typing on the screen and typing messages about reaching out to Mr. Zuo and notifying him that another world had appeared in the northern part of the snowy plains, and that the energy fluctuations had already exceeded the A-class standard. The man's face looked extremely restless as he clenched his teeth tightly and furrowed his brows, sweat starting to trickle down his face. But the man was also wearing an earpiece and the voice from the earpiece said that he understood everything, and that they immediately sent a combat team there and the man himself would soon arrive at the place. Zukayan was surrounded by a huge wolf-like creature from his memories of outer space that appeared on top of him. The wolves stopped. They looked like huskies. Their eyes were blue and glowed with a bright light. They stopped and sniffed. The creature above the guy loomed over Zukayan, its eyes glowing purple. The dogs carefully approached the guy and wanted to sniff him, but the creature looked directly at them. One of the dogs immediately jumped back and got scared. Suddenly, the creature immediately transformed and became like one of the wolves from their pack, and they immediately got scared and ran away from them. A huge crowd of men stood at the edge of a snowy mountain. A blonde-haired man in a red windbreaker and black pants ordered the guys behind him to search the area to see if there were any other victims nearby. The team leader frowned seriously as he peered into the snowy distance. He clenched his hand into a fist. It was the rescue team. Unexpectedly, one of the guys from the rescue team found Zukayan. The creature, having turned into a dog, continued to guard him and raised its muzzle in surprise when it noticed a strange person nearby. One of the voices shouted that there was one other survivor, and the creature immediately became alert, taking a defensive stance. The big brown dog that was accompanying the guy walked up to Zukayan and sniffed at him. A guy with brown hair and a red jacket leaned over him and checked his pulse, examining his chest with a huge hand, thinking only of whether Zukayan was still alive. The male lifeguard sat up, rubbing his forehead, and said that Zukayan was quite badly injured, but still alive. He picked up a huge syringe and grabbed Zukayan's arm, tied a brown rope around the top of the crook of the arm, and picked up a huge syringe with something in it. The man added that he should wake up soon and that the boy was lucky that in such a place he was not devoured by the very centipedes that he had seen. The man frowned seriously and thought about whether it should be this snow wolf that was his spirit beast, because judging by the footprints around, it was probably protecting this guy. I listened carefully to what he was saying. He cocked one ear as soon as the lifeguard started talking about him. Zukayan suddenly woke up and sat down on the snow, rubbing the back of his head and talking about how his whole body was hurting. The lifeguard who was examining him suddenly turned in his direction and raised his eyebrows in surprise. The dark-haired boy frowned and wondered where he had been and where he might have been transported. When his eyes brightened a little, he saw a huge pile of snow in front of him. Zukayan rubbed her forehead and thought about the fact that her head hurt a little, and at the same time, it was as if a lot of memories were mixed together. In one of the flashbacks, a small dark-haired youth was standing surrounded by two adults, a girl with long brown hair and a man with dark hair in a suit. In another, he was standing and holding some dark box with strange contents, and in another one, he was holding a paper with a notice written on it. At 4, he was standing in front of a portrait of the same people, namely a girl with brown hair and a man with dark short hair. In another, he was walking somewhere, and in another, he saw huge monsters. In his last memory, he saw a huge mouth open in front of his face. This was too much for Zukayan. He started to rub his head and clenched his teeth tightly, his brows furrowed. They were completely different memories, and he couldn't tell if they were his memories. His eyes suddenly widened. He realized that there was snow everywhere, and it looked like Zukayan had actually been transported somewhere. Zukayan looked up and looked at the sky, which was nothing but snow that was falling in flakes on the ground. Understanding the whole situation, he panicked at first, but after just a couple of seconds, he calmed down and took a deep breath. Suddenly, he said in a loud voice that it was finally his turn and where were the cheats, unprecedented power, because finally it was his time to prove himself. The 3 rescuers standing nearby couldn't understand what he was talking about, and one of them said that this guy didn't seem to be very smart, and the other said that he probably just damaged his brain. The men looked somewhat puzzled by Zukayan's behavior and words. One of the men, who was holding a bottle with the contents in his hands, told the captain that the identity was established. A panel flashed up with information: name, Zukayan, age, 18, gender, male, residence permit, northern border city of Yunzhou. The photo was indeed a portrait of a guy with dark hair, wearing a blue hoodie and a dark black jacket draped over it. The man thoughtfully rubbed his chin on his face and said that it was probably the orphan of a fallen hero, a future college freshman, and also a talented student from a prestigious school. He definitely needed to be protected. Another man approached him and said that with the appearance of this boy, all the people affected by centipedes were certified and the task was completed perfectly. The man, however, did not really listen to him and thought about something. Suddenly, he called out to Zukayan and asked, how did he survive those centipedes? Zukayan shifted the man's focus and told him to turn around. The man with short blonde hair frowned seriously, grinned, and replied that it was the Lord of the Snowy Plains, the Sorcerer Baileys. A huge dragon-like creature appeared behind them. Its muzzle was elongated, its body was covered with fur, and its eyes shone with a bright light. It was the Sorcerer Baileys. He raised his muzzle to the top and looked up at the sky. One of the men told them not to worry, because the creature must not be able to attack them, and they would bring Zukayan back to the city safely. Zukayan thought uneasily about what exactly should be, and he couldn't possibly try it on as soon as he was reborn. They put the guy in the car and set off on the snowy road. After a while, Zukayan found himself in a house that looked like an office. He sat on a chair, bandaged up, and thought that his whole body ached incredibly. At first, he even thought he was dreaming, but the pain was too real. Zukayan's entire body was covered in bandages, from her hands to her feet. Suddenly, he pulled something that looked like a wallet out of his pants pocket. After looking at the item carefully, he told himself that it really looked like he had entered another world. Zukayan frowned at first, then smiled smugly and said that he was as handsome as ever. The document contained his photo and the inscription student ID card on top with information about him. This is a student ID card from Bingyuan University. According to Zukayan's memories, it was one of the most prestigious schools in the north. Xian grinned, looking away. It is said that in the depths of the northern part of the snow plains, an otherworldly world appeared. Otherworldly beasts in the form of centipedes escaped from there. Currently, they were all cleared out by the Nightwalkers. A voice from the huge TV in front of which the guy was sitting was telling him new information. Zukayan said that this other world turned out to be something from his memories. The voice from the TV news went on to say that the public was advised not to visit the northern regions until after the exploration of the other world, and that the chief daywalker Zhuo Jin had arrived at the entrance of the other world. Zukayan carefully looked at the screen and asked himself, wouldn't it be the same monster they saw earlier in the day? The same monster that looked like a dragon appeared on the screen, and a man with long white hair and a red cloak stood to the side of him, his back turned to the news camera. Zukayan realized that there was a person sitting on top of this very monster. Zukayan immediately ran to the TV screen, grabbed it, and took a closer look. Everything turned out to be correct. Apparently in this world, there is a profession called Spirit Manager. People can enter into a spiritual contract with the spiritual animals of this world, controlling them to fight, conduct exploration, and so on. However, it looked like Zukayan himself hadn't become a spirit steward yet. However, it sounded incredibly cool. Images of men, mysterious, in red cloaks, appeared in the guy's head, and he imagined himself in the place of one of them. A system notification was displayed that said, confirmation of the proofreader status. Zukayan immediately noticed this, exclaiming in surprise. He began to turn his head sharply from side to side, saying that he heard an incomprehensible voice again. Suddenly, he turned to the dog that was wagging its tail and angrily asked the animal that it was definitely him, and he should have known for sure that animals were no longer allowed to become personal spirits. The dog smiled smugly and said nothing, just continued to wag its tail. Zukayan, however, didn't appreciate it and told him that he wasn't actually praising him. Suddenly, my phone fell out of my pocket, and a notification appeared on it that the charge was 90%. The guy was distracted by it, about to pick up the phone from the floor, and when he picked up the phone, he saw on the screen that the charge was already 99%. Zukayan didn't understand what was going on and decided that it must be some kind of joke, and wasn't this the same phone that he had brought with him, and what had suddenly changed with it. A system notification appeared on the screen, which said, System boot is complete. Host, Zukayan, race, human, status, proofreader. Another system notification was displayed, which included a description, received passive skill animal language, has the ability to communicate with spiritual beasts. Another notification was displayed, which read, obtained active skill golden hands. As a traditional art, the host can stroke a contract spirit and use spiritual power to develop its abilities, as well as the limit of spiritual powers. Next notification that a newbie quest has been issued. Become a newbie spirit controller, 0 out of 1 spirit beast contract, quest reward, opening the camera system function. Zukayan immediately flashed his eyes lit up brightly, and his cheeks were covered with a slight blush. He knew that he had entered the system. Suddenly, he started to think, and then exclaimed that he really got to cheat and wants to become a kami of the new world. The guy laughed madly, looking up at something incomprehensible. Then just as unexpectedly, he suddenly calmed down and bent down in front of the dog, asking him what the kind of traditional art it was. The dog looked at him blankly. Did this mean that if he stroked the dog, he could make it grow? Suddenly, Zukayan stood in front of the dog with a crazy smile and burning eyes and hovered over him, talking about how he would become a spirit steward, and immediately grabbed the dog and started scratching its belly. The dog was not particularly happy with this and began to roar and try to escape from his embrace. Suddenly, a blue light shrouded them, and Zukayan looking around to see what was going on. A system notification flashed that read, Congratulations on becoming a novice spirit controller, the camera function has been unlocked. Zukayan immediately let go of the dog and carefully looked at his hand, not understanding if he really became a spirit steward. After all, it seemed as if nothing had changed. The dog, meanwhile, looked rather depressed about what had just been done to it. The system's notification flashed and said, Host, Zukayan, status, proofreader, rank, novice spirit manager, 1 star. Contract Spirit Beast, Snow Pseudo, Spiritual Power 100 out of 100, Existing Skills, Beast Language, Golden Hands, Camera. Zukayan leaned over the phone and carefully studied the system notifications, saying that of course the information about him on the system panel had changed. He decided to check out the new camera feature that the system provided him with. He clicked on the camera icon and pointed it at the dog. Suddenly, he saw a creature that looked like the cosmic creature he had envisioned before. Zukayan exclaimed and said that the dog turns out to have been a void beast all along, and then it was him in front of him. The dog suddenly howled and didn't say anything other than that. Zukayan arched an eyebrow in displeasure and said that now it was no wonder that he was together with Zukayan all the time. In the memories, it is said that to make a contract, you need to get the approval of a spirit beast, but he just entered into a contract without hindrance, and this is probably because he already knew this beast before and was familiar with the creature before. The dog immediately started barking and howling. Zukayan started slapping the dog's head in frustration and telling it not to yell because it would wake up a lot of people. The interrupt spell. Zukayan continued and asked the creature that he must not have known either. How is it that somehow the creature followed him into this world and didn't know anything, and wanted Zukayan to send him home, so for this reason, the creature didn't resist his contract. Could it be that this was the power of the beast language? Zukayan had actually started to understand the language of dogs. The dog barked several times in response. Zukayan gave a thoughtful drawl and replied that he understood everything, but at the moment, he also didn't know how to send the creature home, but since they had signed a contract, Zukayan would take full responsibility for it. The guy looked at him seriously, saying that he wasn't going back on his words. The dog immediately ran up to him and started licking his face. The guy laughed merrily and patted him on the head. Zukayan said as he picked up the dog, by the way, Zukayan is about to try out the Golden Hands skill. In the memories, the natural attributes of individual spirit beasts were classified as inferior, ordinary, good, excellent, and excellent. This is equivalent to a human's IQ, and spiritual beasts with high natural attributes are more likely to assimilate and awaken abilities. Who would have thought that Zukayan would be able to enhance the natural attributes of his contract spirit beasts? He used the Golden Hands skill. He squeezed the dog's cheeks, making a funny face. What was even more surreal was that this wacky husky had excellent natural attributes, and it looked like the husky's background was unusual, not to mention that it was very cool to touch. Suddenly, a system notification flashed up, stating that spiritual power was 0 out of 100. Zukayan immediately drooped and said that for some unknown reason, he felt incredibly tired. Suddenly, the guy fell to the floor, causing the dog to cry out in surprise. A second later, Zukayan collapsed and fell asleep almost instantly. The dog immediately started barking, but there was no response from Zukayan. A system notification was displayed stating that an entrance to the other world had been made. 2 huge creatures appeared on top of a snowy mountain. It was the same monster that looked like a dragon, and next to it was another huge blue-colored creature with bright white eyes. He had a long mustache on his sides that fluttered in the wind. There was a man sitting on top of this monster's head. The dragon-like creature said that he felt that something unknown was being born in the depths of this other world. The mysterious man with long blonde hair and a red cape said nothing thoughtfully, but didn't reply. Deep in the other world, a huge, incomprehensible thing, like a lump of meat cloth, swarmed inside. From one of the many time-space rifts, a face peeked out. The creature's face itself was not visible, but it was wearing a mask with a smile. Its hair was long and blonde, pulled back in a ponytail, and its costume was red. A new task has appeared, this time increasing the level. Outside, the evening sun was shining brightly and Zukayan was walking behind the crowd of people. A system notification flashed and said, "New task issued. Upgrade contract spirit beast to normal level 2 stars. Task reward. Opening the skill quick assimilation." Quick assimilation. After the battle is over, the spirit beast can gain more experience. Zukayan carefully looked at the phone screen. Another system notification flashed with a photo of a husky and a description on the side. Snow Plains Wolf Pseudo. Level, normal, 1 star. Spiritual power, 110 out of 110. Mood, joyful. Natural data, excellent. Skills, Spreading Claw, Ice Breath, Countless Transformations. Void Beast has the appearance of a Snow Plains wolf. Evolution material, Space-Time Crystal, Ice Crystal. Zukayan carefully looked at his phone, studying the information on the screen. He wondered, did Husky become an app on the phone? There was more data compared to the camera image, experience, mood indicator, evolution materials, and so on. It was like the spirit beast that he was making a contract with was appearing in the system as an app. The most important thing is the materials of evolution. This ice crystal can still be found in Zukayan's memories, but a space-time crystal. He'd never even heard of them. Zukayan patted the dog's head, which wagged its tail happily. There is also this amount of spiritual power, which is described below. Last night, after just one use of the golden hands, he lost consciousness almost instantly. He remembered falling to the floor and falling asleep almost seconds later. In the end, he was squeezed out like a lemon and raised the husky's spiritual strength limit by only 10 points. He was suddenly interrupted by an unexpected voice. The girl appeared behind him and grabbed him by the shoulder. Looking at the phone, she turned to him and asked what he was looking at so seriously. Zukayan immediately exclaimed and turned around abruptly, hiding the phone behind his back and saying that he wasn't actually looking at anything. Standing in front of him was a girl with her arms crossed. It was the daughter of a fellow parent, Yun Yao. She tilted her head questioningly, looking at the young man. The girl was wearing a white shirt, a purple vest, and behind her on her shoulders sat an unusual creature that looked like a small fox cub with long ears, dark blue eyes, and a white fur coat painted green. The girl's hair was short and lilac in color, and her eyes were a dark burgundy color. It was his old childhood friend. Their families were friends with each other. Unexpectedly, Yun Yao snatched the phone away from him and said that it was too suspicious and she was curious to see what was going on there. Yun Yao looked at the phone screen and asked, "Zukayan, did he get a dog?" The guy tried to snatch the phone back in a panic, but the girl managed to dodge in time and continued to study the information on the screen of his phone as if nothing had happened. Yun Yao opened her phone and said that indeed, he really did have a dog. A funny picture of a dog with a stupid face appeared on the phone screen. Yun Yao added that she didn't even expect him to like animals, and he was definitely not normal. Zukayan immediately exhaled calmly, grabbing the dog next to him and lifting it up, showing it to the girl. He replied with a nervous smile that it was the same animal. Inwardly, the guy thought that he was now very carried away and it was like he was the only one who could see the special pages of the system, and was it really because of the status of the proofreader? Yun Yao patted the dog's neck, looking at him carefully and saying that she had heard that Zukayan had stumbled upon the otherworld rift in the snowy plains the other day, and she asked if the guy was fine. Did anything happen to him? The young man smiled awkwardly and scratched his cheek, nervously saying that he was fine and only hurt himself a little. And thankfully, thanks to the husky, the other Snow Plains wolves were chased away. Otherwise, Zukayan was afraid that they would definitely pick his bones while he was unconscious. Yun Yao frowned as she looked at the guy and talked about how he could say such terrible things and still smile. The girl turned to the dog, asking if his name was Husky and thanking him for helping Zukayan. She added that she would definitely buy something delicious next time. The girl patted the dog on the head and the dog happily wagged its tail in response. Suddenly, Zukayan realized something, and suddenly, he asked the girl if he could take a picture of her Fluffy who was sitting on his shoulders. The girl frowned and replied that of course she could, but did he have any suspicious strange hobbies in mind? Zukayan replied in surprise, how was this even possible? Zukayan took out his phone and pointed the camera at Yun Yao's creature, and a system notification flashed on the screen, which read, Object, Snow Starry Night Fox, Level, Normal, 4 stars, Spiritual Power Value, 240 out of 240, Natural Data, Excellent, Skills, Snow Blast, Star Capture. After reaching adulthood, the Snow Night Starlight Cubs that are close to humans can borrow the power of the stars in addition to their ability to control snow and ice. Zukayan silently looked at the information on his phone. Yun Yao looked back at him blankly. The young man turned to the girl and she asked what had happened. Suddenly, Zukayan showed her a screen with a picture of her pet on her phone and loudly asked what she was teaching Fluffy at home after all. The screen showed her pet, who was dancing strange dances and was dressed in strange, incomprehensible clothes. Yun Yao immediately blushed and demanded that the guy immediately delete what was recorded on the phone. Zukayan innocently raised his hands while the girl waved her hands in different directions. Yun Yao cleared her throat, then crossed her arms and looked away. She asked Zukayan what he was thinking with such a sour expression just now. Zukayan scratched the back of his head and replied with an awkward smile that it was because he had signed a contract with this husky last night and he was worried about how to promote the husky to 2-star. Yun Yao shook her head and asked if the guy really became a spirit steward, because she thought that he would never make a contract with a spirit animal in his entire life. She immediately asked, why did he decide to make a contract with the Snow Plains wolf, however? After all, there are many Snow Plains spirit beasts, but very few can form a contract with the Snow Plains wolf. Zukayan hugged the dog and asked the girl with a satisfied smile, what was wrong with the Snow Plains wolves, and weren't they super cute? Furthermore, Zukayan was still alive thanks to one of them. Yun Yao arched an eyebrow and asked, didn't the guy know that the character of the Snow Plains wolf wasn't suitable for making a contract? In addition, wolves' natural stats were usually relatively low, and their spiritual strength limit was low. Zukayan looked at the dog, and he looked at him and thought to himself about what he should do in this situation, because he can't tell her that her husky is not a real husky. Yun Yao laughed as she slapped the boy's chest and told him not to despair, because it was said that the Snow Plains wolves could awaken very powerful companion skills. The dog raised its muzzle up, listening intently to the two people. The girl continued to smile nervously and thought to herself that it was actually rare to hear about the awakening of the contract wolf of the Snowy Plains. Zukayan looked at her and asked what exactly a companion skill was, and the girl replied that companion skills can only appear in spirit beasts that have signed a contract. For example, her Star Fox has a chance to awaken the Snow Dance companion skill. At the expense of the expenditure of spiritual forces, it allows Fluffy to move through snow and ice. Zukayan pretended to understand as he continued to nod his head and rub his chin. The girl continued and explained that, however, the spiritual power of newbies who control spirits is very weak. Even if a contract spirit beast has high natural attributes and they are lucky enough to awaken a companion skill, even a few times will not be needed to spend all their strength, and in serious cases, they may even faint and lose consciousness. Zukayan immediately trembled, grabbed his shoulders, and said with a displeased look that, however, if they rested well, their spiritual strength would gradually recover. The boy immediately recalled the events of the previous night when he fainted. Yun Yao held up her index finger and smiled, continuing to say that, simply put, it could be considered that this was the MP value in the game. MP 100 out of 100. Zukayan asked, how to increase the spiritual power of the spirit then? The girl looked up at the sky with a thoughtful face and replied that whenever a contracted spirit animal made a breakthrough, the contract would nourish the spirit steward's spiritual powers, both parties mutually complementing each other and growing together, which was the original purpose of the spiritual contract. However, the girl added that she had heard that there were natural resources and treasures that could directly increase the spiritual power of a spirit steward, but of course, it wasn't something that she and Zukayan could access so easily. Zukayan carefully looked at the girl and asked, what about the limit of spiritual power of spiritual beasts? Is it really the same as the manager's? The girl began to move her fingers in a circular motion and said that the limit of the soul power of a spiritual animal corresponds to its race and level, and it naturally increases, only a breakthrough is needed. Representatives of the first race may differ greatly in their natural data. Excellent natural data is stronger in comparison with low ones. Of course, these powerful spirit beasts are born with a high limit of spiritual powers. Therefore, they usually use the spiritual strength indicator to directly determine the strength of a race. Zukayan continued to listen carefully to the girl and wrote down almost everything she said in a notebook. Zukayan couldn't believe what the girl was telling him. What she said to him was unbelievable. Then wasn't it a bug that he could raise the limit of a spirit animal's soul power? The girl interrupted his thoughts and added that he had just told her that he wanted the husky to rise to the usual level of 2 stars. Zukayan turned his attention to her, shifting his gaze to Yun Yao. Yun Yao immediately smiled as she pointed at herself and asked, what about letting her Fuzzy practice with his husky? The animal sat on the girl's shoulders and immediately squeaked and picked up the words of the hostess. The guy stood in front of the dog and with a disgruntled face added that her Star Fox was much higher level than his husky, and what kind of fight could we talk about? The dog didn't react at all and looked at the owner. Zukayan immediately smiled contentedly and thought to himself that fighting a super famous spirit beast should give him a lot of experience. Yun Yao smiled as she lowered her pet to the ground and told Zukayan not to worry, because she would be lenient. She ordered Fuzzy to rush forward. The dog stood in front of the animal and looked at it. The animal came closer to the dog and the dog looked questioningly at the pet. Yun Yao looked down and thought that the Star Fox was much smaller and more agile, but it didn't have the same stamina as the Snow Plains wolf. And although Fluffy was high level, he wasn't a strong spirit beast and wouldn't be able to withstand a few blows from the splitting claw skill. The girl thought about it, put her hand forward and told the pet to use a snow blast and block the view. The animal immediately took up a fighting stance, preparing to attack. The animal puffed out its cheeks and rushed forward, a huge snow wind flying towards the dog. Zukayan immediately roused up and told that stupid dog to dodge, and used icy breath on the snow mass and forced Yun Yao's pet to step forward in front of him. The husky opened its mouth. Huge ice spikes flew from the husky's direction. Yun Yao's pet immediately disappeared and the view was blocked. Zukayan exclaimed in surprise, not understanding what had happened, and the girl smiled triumphantly. The guy immediately turned away, clutching his head, and said that he was just a fool out of inexperience. Yun Yao smiled and told him that it was really stupid. She ordered the pet to use a snow blast on the husky this time and to make the pet remember to take it easy. The boy turned to face Yun Yao and clenched his hands into fists, gritting his teeth tightly. Zukayan ordered the husky to use splitting claws to push the opponent's pet away. The husky immediately rushed forward in the direction of the fox. A huge blizzard flew from the pet's direction. The husky turned his menacing gaze up and took a closer look. Suddenly, his space form began to float out. Zukayan immediately caught himself and thought that the husky seemed to have completely lost his temper and immediately ran over and hugged the dog's neck. Still, it wasn't worth revealing the husky's true form just yet. Zukayan hugged the dog and said that it was fine, they would admit defeat. Yunyao smiled smugly and replied that she and Fluffy were probably too strong. Both the owner and her pet looked extremely pleased with themselves. Huskies, however, were not particularly happy with this arrangement. Zukayan continued to hold the animal until it stopped barking furiously. Zukayan gave the pet a good pat and it went quiet again for a couple of seconds, but then it started barking furiously again. The girl looked at them carefully and asked Zukayan if his dog enjoyed his protection. It was getting late and the boys headed for the gate. Zukayan took out his phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. On the screen was information about his dog, skills, Eye of True Sight, unknown, not unlocked, Fake Beast Body, unknown, not unlocked, Soul Fusion, unknown, not unlocked, Boundless Summon, unknown, not unlocked. The young man noticed that there were also a lot of non-unlocked features in the system and was wondering if he needed to level up the husky to unlock them. Zukayan lowered her gaze, carefully studying the information on the screen. It was like he needed to raise the husky to 2 stars as soon as possible and unlock quick assimilation to speed up the levels, and he also needed to find out what the word corrector meant. Several kids were sitting in different places while the man in front of them stood at the table and said that he congratulated everyone on joining. The man was standing on the podium when there was a huge projection screen behind him. A guy with short hair and glasses was carefully talking about being the B team leader in Bingyuag. The man adjusted his glasses on his face and added that the students should have seen the news that a new other world had appeared in the northern part of the snowfield. At the request of their educational institution, military training of first-year students will be conducted in the outside world, and the result of this military training will be the results, and they will be included in their final grades and affect the professional classification in the next semester. He also added that they should take this very seriously. The students began to whisper among themselves, and one of them said that there were an incredible number of terrifying creatures in the world. The other in response asked the guy what he was afraid of, because Mr. Zhou himself went there. Another one student said that it should be safe there, otherwise they would not have started sending students there. Another one student added that he wanted to go to the operations department, not the cannon fodder department. Zukayan, meanwhile, was lying on his desk, clearly not particularly interested in what the man was saying. The dog was sitting in the next seat next to him. The guy with the displeased face said that even here he couldn't avoid military training. The man who was standing in the stands smiled and gave them a thumbs up, telling them not to worry, because the surrounding area had been cleared and only a few low-level beasts were left, and that it would only be a great lesson for them to control spiritual beasts. The teacher also added that military training will begin in a week, and he advises them to start training in the near future. The teacher also added that it is worth working in groups of 3 people, and that people in groups take care of each other. The dog looked blankly at Zukayan, who immediately jumped on the spot due to a sudden idea that came to his mind. Zukayan immediately smiled maliciously and looked at his familiar friend Yunyao, saying that it was only good and good for him, because this way the girl would be able to help him. The girl frowned and sighed. Zukayan immediately sat down next to her and crossed his arms, trying to smile as charmingly as possible, and asked Yunyao if she would like to work together so that they could take care of each other. The girl hesitantly replied that it should be so. Zukayan grabbed her pet's hind legs with a satisfied smile. Yunyao looked at him awkwardly and asked why he was holding onto her pet's paws as well. Yunyao also asked, where can they get 3 people? Zukayan immediately smiled happily and was about to walk away with a gloating smile, replying to the girl that it was easy and that he was going to find someone for them now. Zukayan walked over to the guy who was sitting one. The guy had short pink hair and was wearing a brown windbreaker. Zukayan smiled at him as he extended his hand forward and asked if he had a group and would like to join them. The young man raised his hand and a small thin snake wrapped around his arm. He said that it should be so, but before that, can he ask who Zukayan's spirit beast was? The stranger had a normal 2-star ice snake. The snake stuck out its tongue and looked at the boy with its purple eyes. It was an ice snake, ordinary, 2 stars. Zukayan smiled and pointed behind him, saying that he had an ordinary 1-star snow wolf, the one over there that was sitting at the desk. Zukayan asked how he felt, and the dog looked incredibly majestic and pleased with itself. The husky immediately lifted its muzzle, smiling and closing its eyes. The young man immediately looked at him blankly and smiled awkwardly. He thought it was someone's pet, but it wasn't a spirit beast. He immediately smiled awkwardly and waved, saying that he suddenly remembered that he already had a band and that he should look for someone else. The stranger only thought that it is definitely impossible to be in one team with him. Zukayan looked at him in silence as the guy smiled awkwardly. Zukayan immediately turned around, upset by his reaction, and said that the stranger should have said it earlier and not wasted any time. The stranger was thinking that the snow wolves had poor combat power and low obedience, and who would want to team up with a guy like him? Zhu Kaiyan walked over to another student and asked the girl if she would like to join the group. The girl smiled just as awkwardly and told him to try looking for someone else. Zhu Kaiyan turned away and scratched his head and couldn't figure out what the problem was. Did no one like his dog? Husky cocked her head questioningly. The guy continued to approach one student after another and each of them told him no. Unexpectedly, a voice behind him said that the snow wolf was one of the most common and few potential inferior types, and it was amazing that someone managed to make a contract with such an animal. This voice belonged to one of the students with short red hair. He was smiling smugly and added that he didn't even know if this contract was due to stupidity or poverty. Zhu Kaiyan immediately frowned, gritted his teeth, and turned towards the person who was speaking, asking about what he had just said once again. The young man spread his hands, shrugged his shoulders with a smile saying that he didn't mean to offend him. Zhu Kaiyan carefully looked at the young man, but he didn't say anything and turned around, walking up to his seat. Yun Yao was still sitting at her desk when a guy came up to her and asked if she would like to join them since they were one person short. The girl smiled and said that she already had a band. A gloomy Zhu Kaiyan walked over to her and plopped down in his seat, looking extremely depressed. The guy said that no one wanted to team up with him. The girl bowed her head and replied that it was natural because everyone wants to be with the strongest, and a snow wolf is not the best choice. Zhu Kaiyan immediately frowned and looked at the crowd of students in front of him. They were talking to each other, and one of the voices asked if Lu Liang wanted to team up with them. Lu Liang had a 5-star spirit beast. A lot of students surrounded Lu Liang and asked if he wanted to join their group. Someone lured them with the fact that they had a man with a 3-star beast in their team. Lu Liang had long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, a dark sweatshirt, and a white windbreaker. The guy hesitantly told the crowd that he already had a band. The young man smiled awkwardly. The red-haired man squinted in the boy's direction and turned away in displeasure. Zhu Kaiyan pondered. A 5-star spirit beast. He clenched his hand into a fist and replied that it wasn't a big deal, and he would make them regret it. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen. So far, he could unlock the fast absorption skill, and it would definitely impress them during their military training. The guy turned to the girl and asked Yun Yao, where is there a suitable place in Linjiang City to teach beginners how to control spirits? The girl cocked her head thoughtfully, putting her finger on her chin, and replied that such places were the Spirit Control Pavilion, and that she trained there during the summer holidays, so they were able to increase the level to the usual 4 stars. Yun Yao stood up from her seat, stretching, and replied that if she had known that he would choose Spirit Control, she would have brought him along. Yun Yao also added that the pavilion, by the way, was free for orphans like him and her. And of course, this is only limited to translating the beginner's mental control. Yun Yao smiled as she held up her index finger and replied that Zhu Kaiyan would be able to level up to 2 stars in just a week. The young man leaned over the dog and patted its face, telling it that tomorrow they would go and take a look at this spirit control pavilion. Suddenly, the dog barked loudly, so hard that the boy was pulled aside. Zhu Kaiyan pressed her head in displeasure and told her to stop barking so loudly in the audience. The dog made a disgusted face. A huge creature, standing next to Mr. Zuo, stood in front of several people in red uniforms. Next to Mr. Zuo was a huge blue creature with a long mustache on its sides. The man told the people to pass on his order and let the parade enter the other world tomorrow. The Snow Plain Army is at the entrance, and let them remember to remind them that they must not enter the depths of the other world core. The people accepted his order and agreed to it. Zhu Kaiyan and Yun Yao were standing at the counter. 2 girls were standing at the counter and one of them greeted them and told them to show their ID card. Zhu Kaiyan handed the red document into the girl's hands, and one of the girls at the counter looked at it in surprise and thought that it must have been the children of the martyrs. She immediately bowed in front of him. Zhu Kaiyan looked around and looked at the people. There were various people around with their pets. Someone was sitting on their pet, someone had flying birds and they were playing with each other, someone had huge, rhino-like pets. Completely different creatures. Zhu Kaiyan opened his mouth in surprise and opened his eyes. This was the Spirit Control Pavilion. Yun Yao held up a finger with a smile and said that yes, that was the case, and this layer was specially designed for beginners, and above there are levels for more advanced ones. Zhu Kaiyan asked Yun Yao, has she been training here for 2 whole months? Yun Yao smiled and said yes, and it was still free. She went to see Zhu Kaiyan first, but he told her that he was going to the snowfield to do some research and he didn't want to take her with him. Yun Yao couldn't get in touch with him either, but she was very happy that he was fine. Zhu Kaiyan stared thoughtfully in front of him, not immediately finding anything to say. He couldn't remember what he was looking for there, and why couldn't he remember any of it? Zhu Kaiyan and Yun Yao walked down a long corridor. There were various doors with their own license plates everywhere. Yun Yao found the right battle room at 3105. Zhu Kaiyan, meanwhile, continued to drift in his thoughts and thought about what he was hiding, what he was looking for. The girl distracted him and said with a smile on her face that this was the right place, and they had come to the right place. Zhu Kaiyan didn't immediately notice that Yun Yao was speaking to him, and the girl had to pull him by the scruff of the neck to get his attention. Zhu Kaiyan, meanwhile, grabbed the tail of his dog, which looked at him thoughtfully and didn't understand what was going on. The girl began to pull the guy by the scruff of the neck while he was pulling the dog, and the girl replied with displeasure that she thought that in her previous life Zhu Kaiyan was clearly a terrible husky. Suddenly, a guy wearing a blue cap, blue eyes, and short brown hair appeared in front of them. He smiled and said that he remembered her, and her name must be Yan Yao, and she must have a 4-star pet. He clarified, did she really start planning to start the normal difficulty test? The girl smiled awkwardly, waved and said no, and today she brought a friend with her. The pet on her shoulders rubbed against her neck and the guy said that her fox was very well behaved. He smiled happily and added that he couldn't forget how easily she had taken the 3rd place in the list of 1-star permits. Yan Yao smiled awkwardly as she scratched her head and looked away, saying that it was just luck. Zhu Kaiyan turned to her and asked what kind of permission it was. The girl pointed a finger in front of her and said that this was it. There was a sign on the wall that said Easy Difficulty List, which listed several items: 1 Zua Waixu, passing time 3 hours, 45 minutes and 12 seconds, 2 Ziyan, passing time 4 hours, 40 minutes and 35 seconds, 3 Yan Yao, passing time 4 hours, 46 minutes and 50 seconds, 4 Zhang San, passing time 5 hours, 10 minutes and 20 seconds, 5 Unknown, passing time is unknown. Yan Yao smiled and told Zhu Kaiyan to look at the sign, because it was ranked 3rd and it was incredibly cool. Zhu Kaiyan replied that of course he didn't really understand anything, but yes, it was clearly incredibly cool. Yan Yao replied that it was amazing, because in a simple testing ground, 202-star snowboarders and ordinary people can't pass through this test. The girl frowned, turned to the guy and replied that those who can get on the list can get a lot of awards, and so she got 4 stars. Zhu Kaiyan immediately smiled as soon as he heard the word rewards and asked what it was about. Zhu Kaiyan clarified that those who are included in the list will be granted a lifetime VIP and all objects in the entire building can be used at a discount. The youth in the cap replied that as for the reward, it should not disappoint him. None of the novice spirit lords have yet said that they didn't like the reward. Yan Yao crossed her arms, closed her eyes, and asked, is Zhu Kaiyan really here? The guy asked if he really wanted to pass the test and where was his contract spirit beast. Zhu Kaiyan picked up the dog and revealed that it was him. The guy in the cap immediately laughed awkwardly and told him not to joke like that, and Zhu Kaiyan asked him if his husky wasn't intimidating. Yan Yao gave a serious look and said that the snow wolf was indeed his spirit beast. The guy didn't say anything and broke out in sweat with an awkward smile, but at the same time changed his face and asked him if he was serious. Although this test was easy, but there are 202-star snowboarders modeled on the training ground, and it will be difficult for a snow wolf to defeat even one snow boar. Moreover, his wolf only had 1 star. A low-level race like the snow wolf will not be able to pass the normal difficulty test. The guy added that it was better for Zhu Kaiyan to give up and not let the contract spirit beast suffer anymore. Zhu Kaiyan listened in silence. He looked at the guy and said he wouldn't know until he tried. Zhu Kaiyan clenched his hands into fists and asked seriously, can he start the test? The guy in the cap frowned slightly and replied that of course he could, and it was his choice, and that he would notify the medical staff just in case. The guy turned to the girl and asked if she wouldn't stop Zhu Kaiyan. Yan Yao smiled and said that she believed in him. Zhu Kaiyan found himself together with the husky in a huge field. There was nothing but high gray walls. A voice announced that they were starting. They were transported to a snowy space. There was nothing but snow around them. Zhu Kaiyan frowned seriously as the husky took up a fighting stance, looking around carefully. Suddenly, a boar caught their attention. It was black in color and its eyes were burning with a fierce red color. It was breathing angrily. Zhu Kaiyan leaned down next to the dog and whispered to it that when the boar ran over, then let it jump up and attack its neck with its claws and didn't show its main body. After all, they only needed to hold on to get 2 stars. Zhu Kaiyan wrapped his arms around the dog's neck and stroked it. The dog immediately barked and raised its muzzle in a warlike howl. The dog abruptly rushed to the boar, stopping in front of it, and just as the boar was about to attack, the husky jumped over and was behind the boar. It immediately scratched the opponent's entire back and slowly landed nearby. The boar immediately charged in his direction. He was about to attack the dog when Zhu Kaiyan shouted loudly for the husky to look around. Several more boars formed around the dog. All of them started running towards him and the dog deftly dodged. From the blows of the husky, one of the boars triumphantly fell. After a very quick movement, another boar began to attack. It hit the dog in the back and it was slightly thrown to the side. Husky sat up, shivering slightly. The young man in the cap and Yan Yao, who was watching, opened their eyes in surprise. The young man frowned and said that it was amazing that his 1-star wolf really had something special. He really couldn't believe that a husky could even get up after such a thing. The girl didn't say anything, just continued to watch the scene in front of her in silence. Yan Yao was looking at the screen when she saw the face of a guy who was seriously frowning and looking at the fight. Yan Yao silently wished Zhu Kaiyan good luck. Zukayan carefully looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked at him, waiting for an order. Husky was immediately surrounded by a lot of exactly the same boars. They started attacking him, continuing to beat him endlessly. The dog was trembling, covered in small scars, and Yun Yao immediately started up as she looked at the screen. Suddenly, the dog stood up and bright red lights began to wriggle out of his body where the scars should have been. The dog stared ahead at the pack of opponents. Yun Yao and the boy were looking at the screen in front of them. He asked, did the Snow Plains wolf really have such a skill? Yun Yao replied that it was also the first time she had seen such a red aura and a snow wolf in such a state. The guy looked thoughtfully at the screen and replied that he thought he had seen it somewhere before, but couldn't remember exactly where. The husky continued to be shrouded in bright red lights, and he bared his teeth and barked loudly in front of him, which immediately made the boars tense up. The youth in the cap leaned over the table and frowned, saying that it was the Lord's Intimidate skill that only population rulers have, and then the skill suddenly appeared in a normal level 1 spirit beast. Yun Yao looked at the guy questioningly and asked what kind of bullying he was talking about. The young man carefully looked at the screen and added that this is a skill that rulers are born with, and if it was an ordinary snow boar, it would be stunned or it would run away in fear, but these snow boars are virtual, they have no self-awareness, and they are not afraid of intimidation. Zukayan frowned as the husky continued to growl and show his teeth. Suddenly, he rushed towards the boars and immediately cut one of them into pieces. The youth in the cap frowned in surprise, his eyes widened, and small beads of sweat began to fall from his face. As the saying goes, ants will bite an elephant. Even if it has awakened the intimidation skill, it won't be easy for it to defeat the virtual boars. Yun Yao frowned, also not believing what she was seeing on the screen. She said it wasn't a simple snow wolf at all. The husky continued to cut down one boar after another. Another pack of wild boars rushed towards the dog, but with a quick movement he got rid of them. Zukayan also looked at what was happening in front of him in surprise. He frowned and couldn't figure out what it was with the husky and why it suddenly became so much stronger. Did he use the skills of his main body? Zukayan took out his phone from his pocket and carefully examined the information on the phone. A system plate with the description of his animal flashed up. Snow Plains wolf, pseudo, level, normal, 1 star, spiritual power, 110 out of 110, mood, irritated. Natural attributes, excellent, currently in a state of unknown blessing, skills, splitting claw, icy breath, countless transformations. Unknown blessing, able to cause contracted spirit beasts to enter the state of true beast awakening. A blessing from an unknown being. Zukayan looked in front of him and thought, just what kind of blessing was this from an unknown being? And when did this skill manifest? He looked at the husky that was shrouded in red mist and continued to tear apart one boar after another. Zukayan wondered if this red mist was the awakening of a true beast. The husky continued to glare furiously at the opponents as the boars continued to attack one by one. One of them swept over the husky from above, but the husky continued to get rid of the boars over and over again. The cap-wearing youth tightly clenched his hands into fists. He looked at the battle scene in front of him and said that he remembered that this red blood mist was similar to the blood aura of the Qimu wolf. But this is the legendary race of true wolf ancestors, and how it could manifest in the body of an ordinary Snow Plains wolf. Was this really an awakening bloodline? The creature on Yun Yao's shoulder continued to tremble. The fox cringed, closing his eyes. The man added that he had heard that some contracted spirit beasts could rekindle lineage blood, but only individuals with the most excellent natural attributes had a minimal chance of this awakening. The awakening of a 1-star ordinary level, and even a snow wolf, was quite unheard of. The young man stared straight ahead, rubbing his chin with a finger. This Snow Plains wolf state seemed even more powerful than the awakening of the bloodline. The young man frowned and leaned over the screen, saying that who would have thought that he would have the opportunity to see such a legendary event with his own eyes. After awakening the bloodline, he defeated 44 2-star snow boars. He looked at the screen, which displayed a system sign stating that the current examinee is Zukayan. The number of remaining virtual spirit animals is 156. Yun Yao happily turned around, and with a huge smile on her face, she asked, did this mean that Zukayan would be able to pass the test? The youth continued to stare in a shocked state, saying that of course he could, and if this bloodline awakening state could last longer, then it was possible that he could compete for the first place on the leaderboard. The guy in the cap clenched his hand tightly into a fist and thought that this news should be reported to the chief as soon as possible. Yun Yao immediately happily encouraged the guy on the screen, telling him to keep killing as many people as possible. The young man looked at her with an awkward smile, and after a short silence, he said that Zukayan couldn't actually hear her. Zukayan continued to watch the husky fight in front of him. He tightly clenched his hands into fists and shouted at the animal to be careful. Husky looked around in front of him and checked for enemies, his entire body covered in scars. Zukayan bent over the ground, thinking about how many boars there were after all, as if there was no end in sight. A system notification flashed, which caught the attention of both Husky and Zukayan. A notification flashed that read, Rapid Assimilation, Contract Beast Development Speed Boost, Snow Plains Wolf, Pseudo, Level, Normal, 2 stars, Spiritual Power, 44 out of 210. The following system notification was displayed, which read, Congratulations to the host for completing the Novice Quest and obtaining the Quick Assimilation skill. Quick Assimilation, the development speed of the Contract Spirit Beast will be increased. Snow Wolf, Pseudo, Rank, Normal Level 2 stars increased, Spiritual Strength, 44 out of 210, Mood, Calm, Natural Data, Excellent, currently in a state of unknown blessing. Skills, Splitting Claws, Icy Breath, Countless Transformations, Unknown Blessing, Rapid Absorption, Snow Plains Wolf's Companion Skill Awaken. Carnivorous Habit, the Snow Plains Wolf can capture a portion of the opponent's spiritual power and use it for its own purposes. Zukayan carefully studied the information on the phone screen, catching on to the word promotion. Zukayan looked at the description and wondered what exactly Awaken meant, or was it just a passive type of companion skill? Zukayan thought about it as if the husky had woken up specifically for this situation. He looked puzzled at the dog that was grinning at the opponents ahead of him. The husky continued to swing its paws and deal with the boars with ease. The husky's eyes were bright. Zukayan widened his eyes, and his eyes also lit up with a blue light. The Ice Breath skill wasn't suitable for the thick-skinned snow boars, and it only remains to continue using the Splitting Claw. If the husky hadn't awakened this skill, then most likely the husky's spiritual power wouldn't have endured. Zukayan smiled and said that if Husky could activate this Unknown Blessing skill on his own along with Quick Absorption, maybe he could even go up to 3 ordinary military training stars. Zukayan held his phone and watched as the dog continued to kill one boar after another. He easily threw them around, almost half of the opponents were already passed. The cap-wearing youth frowned seriously at the situation on the screen. Although the interval was getting longer and longer, and the speed of defeating the snow boars was slowing down, how could the snow wolf still use the Splitting Claw skill? Yun Yao listened carefully to the guy's theory and seemed to have an idea. The girl asked, turning to the guy, was it possible that some special recovery skill of the companion was awakened in him? The young man shuddered as he turned to the girl and sighed with a smile, spreading his hands to the sides and talking about how he had never seen a spirit beast awaken a companion skill during the transition from 1 star to 2. Not to mention that it wasn't particularly common for the Snow Plains wolf to have good skills. Natural data. The cap-wearing youth also added that he recognized that the Snow Plains wolf Zukayan was extremely unusual, but it couldn't possibly have excellent natural attributes. Yun Yao said nothing in response. She smiled wide-eyed and said that Zukayan had told her that his Snow Plains wolf had excellent natural attributes. The young man was taken aback by these words. He remained silent, laughed awkwardly, scratched the back of his head, and said that it was true that after just seeing this bloodline awakening, excellent natural data didn't seem like such shocking news anymore. The young man, however, continued to smile discouragingly. Is this still the Snow Plains wolf that he knows? Could it be that the bloodline awakening and the companion skill all had such a big impact and came together in one moment? The husky rushed towards the pack of wild boars, continuing to attack them. Zukayan gave the order for him to jump on the boars. Zukayan gritted his teeth as he stared in front of him, thinking that 200 snow boars was an incredible amount and it seemed that it was completely impossible to kill them all. However, the dog immediately killed several wild boars, sending them to the next world. A notification system flashed on the screen, stating that the current contestant was Zukayan, the number of remaining virtual spirit beasts was 83, and the time taken was 1 hour, 47 minutes and 51 seconds. The young man smiled happily and clenched his hand into a fist. There were already 24 virtual animals left in the next one. The husky continued to deal with them while Zukayan happily cheered him on, clenching his hand into a fist. The dog continued to deal with them easily, kicking them back and throwing them to the sides. They defeated all the boars. The young man smiled smugly, folding his arms across his chest. The wolf standing next to him was also pleased with himself and lifted its muzzle up, wagging its tail happily. A youth wearing a cap stood in front of them and asked them about how it really was the Snow Plains wolf. Zukayan immediately bent down, smiling awkwardly. He cleared his throat and replied that of course, otherwise who else could it be? The guy in the cap smiled awkwardly and said that the Snow Plains wolf wasn't what he knew them to be. The youth was immediately asked, how about we try to go and make a contract with the Snow Plains wolf in the wild? The guy's attention immediately shifted, and he pointed at the table with his finger, saying that the rating had changed. Yun Yao happily folded her arms and smiled proudly, telling him that she had just told him that Zukayan would do it. The other guys looked at the table carefully, seeing that the results had changed. One of the voices said to have everyone look at the leaderboard and that the easy difficulty list for level 1 was updated. Another voice said how was it possible and how did Zukayan manage to. Another stranger said that it looks like the rating has really been updated. They couldn't believe it when such a person appeared in Linjiang City. He took first place as soon as he arrived, which was even more impressive than Zuo Weixu at the time. After all, it took Zuo almost a week to take first place. Linjiang City really has a genius coming. Another unknown voice asked that it was interesting to know what kind of spiritual beast this guy had contracted with and that it must be a super powerful and rare spiritual beast, since its passing speed was almost an hour faster than Zuo Weixu. Zukayan smiled proudly, pointing his finger at himself, grinning with all his teeth. A system board appeared on the screen with a description, easy difficulty list, 1 Zukayan, passing time 2 hours, 53 minutes and 30 seconds. Zukayan smiled contentedly as he pointed at himself and asked the guy in the cap once again what was his passing time. The young man didn't say anything. He said that he would look at his passing time now and said that it was 2 hours 53 minutes, almost an hour faster than Mr. Zuo. Zukayan cheered as he clenched his hands into fists and smiled, and the dog next to him howled proudly. Zukayan asked, did it turn out that he was ranked 1? He looked at the sign and happily thought that he really was. Zukayan patted the husky's head and thought about what kind of reward it would have and how good it would be if it was given money. Yan Yao let out a cry of displeasure and looked at Zukayan, clearly reading his mind, threatening to tell him not to say that he was thinking about money and the reward for first place should be special, something that money couldn't just buy. Zukayan immediately shrank back against his dog. The youth in the cap rubbed his forehead and said with a nervous smile that he didn't have to worry about it, and for Zukayan, their institution would definitely not skimp on the reward. The boy's eyes immediately lit up, and he clasped his hands together in a prayer gesture, asking what exactly the reward would be. The guy in the cap continued to smile awkwardly and replied that he couldn't really answer that yet, and it was up to the pavilion owner's will. The guy gave a thumbs up and added that Zukayan certainly wouldn't be disappointed, and last time Zuo took first place. The owner gave her a precious fire crystal. It was a necessary material for evolution and couldn't be exchanged even for 1,000 gold. Suddenly, the guys came out of the office. When he noticed their absence, the guy in the cap wondered in surprise where they had gone. Zukayan asked Yan Yao where she had collected her clothes, and the girl clenched her hand into a fist and said that it was in the lobby and added that Zukayan definitely did not dare to ask for simple money. The guy in the cap immediately took off and told them not to leave him behind. He couldn't let Zukayan leave, but he had to introduce him to the pavilion master. The young man quickly began to run in his direction, but when he went down to the first floor, he saw that the guys were standing in front of a man with long gray hair and a thick beard. This man was the owner of the pavilion. As the president of the Snow Plains Spirit Management Pavilion, he was usually very busy, and even when he returns to the pavilion, he doesn't show himself in public, so why was it suddenly different today? Zukayan asked the older man for his uncle to give him his reward, saying so with a happy smile and handing him the information tablet. The man took the sign and asked if his name was Zukayan and he was number 1 on the light level of the first floor. Other passersby who heard this immediately turned to look at the two people. Zukayan scratched the back of his head awkwardly as people started discussing him and saying that this was the same Zukayan, even though he was absolutely nothing like someone who could do it. Another voice said that if he wasn't mistaken, there was a Snow Plains wolf by his side. Did the first place winner make a contract with the Snow Plains wolf? And how could the Snow Plains wolf be ranked first? People looked at the pair in surprise. Someone said that the snow fox was his contract spirit animal, and everyone thought that it was the one that he passed the test with. The elderly man asked Zukayan, did he make a contract with this Snow Plains wolf? The young man said that it was so. The man didn't say anything, but then he opened his eyes and thought to himself that it was quite interesting, because this Snow Plains wolf really managed to pass the test. It was like a bloodline awakening. Unexpected for the wolf of the snowy plains. The man thought to himself that he would definitely look forward to the development of this pair. The one-star wolf of the plains topped the list when first visiting the Spirit Management Pavilion. Zukayan would definitely be able to become the second Zuo Weixu, although it looked like he could even surpass her. The man handed the tablet back to him and asked Zukayan what he wanted. He would be able to give him everything in his power. Zukayan immediately gave the man a sly look and asked him again if he was sure he could give him anything he asked for, and was this uncle really in charge? The young man in the cap slapped his face and said that this stupid guy does not understand and does not know who he is standing in front of, and how dare he talk to the president like that. The man smiled, pointed at himself, and said that of course he could give everything. After all, he had founded this spirit control pavilion. Zukayan and Yan Yao looked questioningly at the man in front of them. They immediately jumped on the spot and asked once more if he was really the master of this pavilion, and the elderly man replied that yes, it really was. He asked again what exactly Zukayan wanted. Zhu Kaiyan raised his hand and hesitantly asked if he could ask for money. However, Yun Yao's gloomy figure loomed menacingly behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and Zhu Kaiyan jumped up, saying with a nervous smile that he was joking and would be happy with any item that the man chose for him. The man laughed and said that he liked Zhu Kaiyan's savvy, and since he said so, he didn't want to give him anything bad. The man rubbed his beard thoughtfully. He thought that Zhu Kaiyan was indeed an interesting guy, and it wasn't for nothing that he had come here today to meet him in person. Yun Yao continued to hold him down with a sweet smile, while Zhu Kaiyan smiled nervously and shivered as he stood there. The man asked how he felt that in addition to the usual rewards, the materials for the first evolution of the Snow Plains wolf that he had contracted with would be fully paid for by the Spirit Control Pavilion. He turned to Zhu Kaiyan and asked what he thought about it, and would he be satisfied with this kind of reward. Zhu Kaiyan and Yun Yao looked at the man in surprise, startled by his words. Zhu Kaiyan smiled as he looked at the president in front of him. He hoped that he could become the representative of Linjiang City's spirit managers in the upcoming competition and show off what he was truly capable of. Passers-by watching them began to exchange envious glances and whisper among themselves. Someone was surprised that he would actually be given evolution materials, and wasn't this reward better than Zuo Weixu's? Did the pavilion master think more highly of Zhu Kaiyan than Zuo? Someone said that it wasn't necessary, and that the Snow Plains wolf evolution materials weren't really that valuable. Someone said that it was a pity that it was just an ordinary Snow Plains wolf, because the materials provided for evolution were very likely to be wasted in the end. Zhu Kaiyan happily thanked the host for giving him the reward. Before letting Zhu Kaiyan go, the man added that speaking of which, with the strength that his Snow Plains wolf had displayed, wouldn't he want to try to break the level on normal difficulty? Zhu Kaiyan scratched the back of his head and thought with a smile that since the man was saying that, for him to try a higher difficulty level right after the first test, he must have thought quite highly of Zhu Kaiyan. The man turned away and said that the guy was extremely humble, and that he was joking, and was too busy to spend a few hours watching his ordeal. Zhu Kaiyan laughed awkwardly, so be it. He thought to himself that it wasn't clear exactly what was going on with the husky at the moment, so it wasn't worth it to attract too much attention, even though it looked like it was already causing quite a stir. Passers-by continued to stare at him and watch him closely. The man told him that in that case, Zhu Kaiyan should remember to reserve a seat in advance if he really wanted to pass the normal difficulty level test. The man looked down and thought that he would like to see the awakening of the Snow Plains wolf bloodline with his own eyes. The next day, people kept whispering and talking about how was Zhu Kaiyan the guy who took first place yesterday. And since even the Snow Plains wolf is able to take the first place, then it definitely had to be some kind of scam, and today they will have to reveal his true face. Zhu Kaiyan began to train constantly with his husky. With such training, he will soon be able to practically reach 3 stars before military training. Those who were previously envious of Zhu Kaiyan became real fans after a while, continuing to watch how easy his training sessions were and how the husky dealt with this bunch of wild boars. After a while, he became the best in the class. Even his classmate, who had a 5-star beast, was interested in him. It was the day of military training camps. Zhu Kaiyan had killed many days of constant training. Lu Liang suddenly walked up to them, extending his hand and asking if he could join their team together with Yun Yao as a third person.